Welcome to another deep dive from the Riffle podcast, brought to you by 10 Leaves.
Great to be here.
Today, we're getting into something pretty critical, actually. We're looking at how a major financial hub, the Abu Dhabi Global Market, or ADGM, is tackling data privacy versus, well, the public good. There are some brand new regulations just published today, September 9th, 2025, and they focus specifically on handling sensitive personal data when there's a, quote, substantial public interest.
Yeah, and this is important because ADGM, it's a key international financial free zone. Its rules have ripple effects.
Absolutely.
So understanding how they handle data protection, especially these new updates, is really vital for anyone connected to it. It shows a real evolution in their thinking.
Okay, so let's dive in. We've got two documents from the ADGM board, both dated today. What's the sort of headline news here, the big picture?
Okay, so the board actually enacted these new regulations and rules back on August 22nd, 2025.
Okay. Last month.
Exactly. But they were officially published today, September 9th, which makes them, live and actionable now. We're looking at the Data Protection Regulations, Amendment Number 1, 2025, and the Data Protection Regulations, Substantial Public Interest Conditions, Rules, 2025.
So two related pieces.
Yeah, and it's not like they're throwing out the old 2021 regulations entirely. This is more of a refinement, a significant one, targeted at very specific situations.
Got it. So, like adding a crucial chapter, not rewriting the whole book.
Yeah.
Before we get into those specific conditions, let's talk about the first document, the amendment itself.
Sure.
What was the really foundational change in the Data Protection Regulations, Amendment Number 1, 2025? What did it do?
Well, the absolute key change, the thing that makes everything else possible, is a new bit they inserted into the 2021 regulations, a new subsection, 72K.
Okay.
And it basically says the board can now set out any other conditions as set out in rules made by the board.
Sounds quite technical.
It does, but it's actually incredibly powerful. It's the legal hook. It explicitly gives the board the authority to create those detailed rules we're about to discuss.
Ah, I see. So it unlocks the door for the more specific stuff.
Precisely. Without this little amendment, those subsequent rules wouldn't really have the legal foundation they need within the ADGM framework.
So that was the main event in that amendment document. Anything else worth noting?
Honestly, the rest was mostly procedural housekeeping. Deleting an or in one spot, swapping a full stop for a semicolon in another, renumbering a clause.
Standard legal tidying up.
Exactly. Typical stuff. But that addition, that new subsection 7 to K, that's the real takeaway. That's what enabled this whole discussion on substantial public interest conditions.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? Because that amendment paved the way for the second document, the Data Protection Regulations, Substantial Public Interest Conditions, Rules 2025. So what are these rules actually for? What problem are they trying to solve?
Okay, these rules get very specific. They lay out the exact circumstances where special categories of personal data can be processed.
And that's the really sensitive stuff.
Extremely sensitive stuff, yes. And crucially, these rules define when it can be processed without explicit consent from the person the data is about.
Okay.
If the processing is necessary for reasons of substantial public interest.
That phrase again, what does that generally mean in this context?
Well, substantial public interest isn't just a vague idea. It usually points to things vital for society. Think public health, safety, preventing crime, or making sure essential services like insurance can actually work properly and protect people.
Gotcha.
And these rules, they're made under the authority of the main 2021 regulations, using that new amendment we just talked about. And it'll be the Commissioner of Data Protection's job to oversee them.
So let's clarify for everyone listening. When we say special categories of personal data, what kind of information are we typically talking about? The sources don't list them explicitly, but...
No, they don't list them here. But it's a well-understood term in data protection. We're generally talking about the most sensitive information.
Like?
Things like your racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious beliefs, trade union membership. Also, genetic data, biometric data if it's used to identify you uniquely, health data, and data about your sex life or sexual orientation.
Really personal stuff.
Exactly. Data that, if misused, could cause real harm or discrimination. So these ADGM rules are setting out very specific, narrow pathways for when processing this kind of data without direct consent is permissible for these defined public interest reasons.
Okay, let's tackle the first specific condition they lay out. insurance. This seems like a major one.
It is. Rule 3 covers this. It says processing special category data is allowed if it's needed for an insurance purpose, and it meets that substantial public interest test.
And insurance purpose, how broad is that?
It's pretty broad, actually. It covers advising on insurance, setting it up, underwriting the risk, managing the policy day-to-day, handling claims.
There's a whole life cycle.
Pretty much. And exercising rights or obligations under the contract. It applies to general insurance, long-term insurance, even reinsurance.
Okay, so when can they process this sensitive data, say health data, for underwriting, without my explicit consent? That's the key question.
Right, and here's the really specific part, laid out in subsections 2 and 3 of that Rule 3.
Yeah.
There's a condition attached.
Which is?
If the processing isn't about making decisions that directly affect you, the data subject,
Okay.
and you don't currently have rights or obligations under that insurance contract and aren't expected to get any.
Right, so maybe it's about analyzing risk trends, not my specific policy.
Perhaps, or managing the insurer's overall book.
Mm.
In that specific scenario, the condition is met only if two things are true. First, the controller couldn't reasonably be expected to get your consent.
Okay, maybe impractical.
Possibly.
Mm.
And second, crucially, the controller must not be aware that you've actually withheld consent.
Not aware you've said no.
Exactly.
Mm.
Both parts have to be met.
Now, there's a fascinating clarification in there about not responding to a consent request. What does the rule say about that?
Yes, this is quite pointed. The rule explicitly states that merely failing to respond to a request for consent does not count as withholding consent.
Wow. So silence isn't automatically a no in this specific insurance context.
In this specific limited context, yes. If they ask for consent and you just don't reply, they can't automatically assume you've refused, provided those other conditions we mentioned are met.
What are the implications of that, it seems? Well, significant.
It is significant. For insurers, it removes a potential hurdle where getting explicit consent for every background process might be cumbersome or slow things down.
Makes sense from their perspective.
But from the individual side, as you hinted, it does put a bit more onus on actively saying no if you object, rather than relying on silence. It's a pragmatic choice by ADGM, clearly trying to balance operational needs in a key sector with data rights.
A very fine line they're walking there. Okay, let's move to the second condition. Safeguarding children and individuals at risk. This feels incredibly sensitive. Rule 4, right?
Yes, Rule 4. And you're right, this is about protecting vulnerable people. The condition is met if processing special category data is necessary for one of two main reasons.
Okay.
Either protecting an individual from neglect or harm, physical, mental, or emotional, or protecting their physical, mental, or emotional well-being more generally.
And who does this apply to?
It applies if the individual is under 18.
A child.
Yes, or if they're 18 or over, but classified as being at risk. And again, like insurance, the processing must also be necessary for reasons of substantial public interest.
How do they define an adult who is at risk? That seems like it needs careful definition.
It does, and they provide one. An adult is at risk if the controller has reasonable cause to suspect three things are true about them.
What are they?
1, they have needs for care and support. 2, they are experiencing or are at risk of neglect or harm, physical, mental, or emotional. And 3, because of those needs, they can't protect themselves from that neglect or harm.
That seems quite comprehensive. It covers vulnerability quite specifically.
It does. It's clearly aimed at situations where intervention might be necessary to protect someone who can't protect themselves.
And crucially, this rule also allows for processing without consent in certain cases. When is that permitted here?
Yes, similar to the insurance rule, but perhaps even more critical here. Processing without the data subject's consent is allowed under 3 specific scenarios.
Okay.
1, if consent simply cannot be given by the person in those circumstances, maybe they lack capacity. 2, if the controller can't reasonably be expected to get consent, perhaps it's an emergency.
Makes sense.
Or 3, if actually trying to get consent would prejudice the protection needed, meaning asking for permission might delay help or even make the situation worse.
That last one seems vital for immediate safeguarding actions.
Absolutely. It allows professionals to act decisively when necessary to protect someone vulnerable without being unduly hindered by consent requirements in those specific urgent situations.
There's also a detail in the rule mentioning protection for a particular individual and a type of individual.
Yeah.
What's the significance of that?
That's an interesting point. It suggests the rule isn't just for reacting to a single known case of risk.
Ah, so it's broader.
It seems so. By mentioning a type of individual, it implies these rules could support more proactive, systemic safeguarding measures. Think about developing services or policies designed to protect categories of people known to be vulnerable, not just responding after harm occurs to one person.
That allows for preventative work then.
Potentially, yes. It allows for data processing that supports wider protective frameworks, which is quite forward-thinking in a regulatory sense.
Okay, so stepping back from the details for a moment. We have these two specific conditions, insurance and safeguarding, where sensitive data can be processed without explicit consent under the banner of substantial public interest. What's the big picture takeaway here? What does this all mean?
Well, I think it shows ADGM taking a very detailed and uh, quite sophisticated approach to data protection. They're not just issuing broad principles. They're providing concrete rules for difficult situations.
And providing clarity, essentially.
Exactly. Clarity for controllers, especially in sectors like insurance and social care, on how to handle incredibly sensitive data when faced with competing priorities, the individual's privacy versus the need to operate essential services or protect vulnerable people.
So it's about balancing those competing needs.
Precisely. It's a careful balancing act. These rules try to establish a robust legal framework that acknowledges the public interest in certain processing activities while still, hopefully, maintaining strong data protection standards overall. It signals ADGM's commitment to a very granular, accountable data environment.
It does seem like a thoughtful attempt to navigate some really tricky ethical and practical territory, giving specific guidance rather than leaving it vague.
Yes, it provides much-needed specifics for controllers dealing with these complex scenarios involving special categories of data.
So reflecting on all this, it really brings up a fundamental question for all of us to think about, doesn't it?
Hmm.
How do these kinds of specific conditions, these carve-outs for substantial public interest, actually shape or maybe even redefine our understanding of privacy itself?
Mhm.
Especially in contexts where that very personal data needs to be weighed against a perceived collective good, like public safety or the functioning of essential industries. Where do we draw the line?
That's the crucial ongoing debate, isn't it? And these rules are ADGM's latest contribution to that conversation.
Indeed. A lot to consider there. And that wraps up another deep dive from the Riffle podcast, brought to you by 10 Leaves. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.